Welcome back to a conversation on human trafficking in Florida. Our panelists for this next segment of the show are Zach Hughes, who is the deputy with the Marion County Sheriff's Office and a social justice advocate. Frank Williams is a prosecutor with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Jeanne Singer is a chief assistant state attorney with the 8th Judicial Circuit. And Elizabeth rejoins us for this discussion as well. We're going to be hearing now from Trudy Novicki, who was also featured in The Stolen Ones. She is the author of the state's Safe Harbor Act. It failed 3 times in Tallahassee and was passed in January of 2012.
The two biggest obstacles to getting it passed were opposition from law enforcement on what was called decriminalizing prostitution, and funding. So even though we wrote everywhere in the statute to take them to a safe house if available, there was a fear that it was going to create additional drain on the state coffers. So anyway, we inserted it into the child welfare legislation and tried to remove the children from the criminal statute, to say if you were under 18, you had to be 18 or over to commit the crime of prostitution. That never passed, that part of it. We were successful in getting the safe harbor legislation overlaid and creating the system of short-term and long-term safe houses within the statute. We were successful in expanding the definition of child sexual abuse to include children involved in prostitution. But we were not successful in decriminalizing child prostitution in the state of Florida.
And Frank, I'll begin with you. She talks about those 2 big issues, the opposition to decriminalizing prostitution and also to the funding question. What about the decriminalization issue? Can that Safe Harbor Act be expanded, and should it be?
Well, that's a tough question. Now, I can speak from the federal law, but not with respect to the state law, the Safe Harbor. What I can tell you is some things about the current law as it stands is that if you have a child, a person under the age of 18, you don't have to have an element of what's called force, fraud, or coercion in order for them to be commercially sexually exploited. But for some reason, when they reach the age of 18, there's a magical change and they're no longer a victim. Suddenly they become a defendant. And that's an anomaly in the law, and I think that's another point of confusion with law enforcement is that's an area where we can further educate them, is that the vast majority of the women and men over the age of 18 actually came into this life when they were children, and they remain victims throughout their lifetime. So that's an area that I think we especially need to work with law enforcement on, raising their level of awareness.
Okay, and Jeanne, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I have to agree with Frank on that, and also the idea that the behavior is not accepted in the community, and so law enforcement, and I know Mr. Hughes will speak on this, law enforcement is called out to undo a situation that's not acceptable to the community, and without truly understanding what the issues are, without truly understanding that these young women who are actually prostituting themselves as adults were at one time the victims of horrific, terrible situations, typically in the family scenario. Without understanding that and knowing that they have to solve a problem, I think that it's difficult for them not to take a prostitute into custody. The community then says, oh, you've cleaned up South Main Street, or you've cleaned up such and so street. The law enforcement agency looks like they're doing their job because something, quote, has to be done. And I turn to you to respond to that. I think you
honestly, I mean, I think, while I don't specifically do what's called a John reverse, where we go after the demand side or any of those things. What I can tell you is monitoring the social media and watching when the Ocala Star Banner puts an ad there that we arrested 30 people in a John reverse, and the public doesn't care. Why are you doing this? Why are you spending my tax dollars on a John reverse? Why are you doing this? We don't see the typical traditional street prostitution, at least in my area. It's all going digital, whether it's Backpage or Craigslist or USA Sex Guide or Eros or any number of sites. So we're seeing some of that transfer. So it's not out in the public view as much as it used to be, unless while it's not uncommon, people know where to look. It hasn't gone anywhere. It's just moved what form. So I mean, you can find that track now, which is digital, in 30 seconds or less from a smartphone right in this room. So some of that occurs pretty regularly.
And what's also interesting about the victims, who are also considered the defendant prostitutes, the very interesting fact, and I'm sure that you can speak on this as well, is that many times they don't want to be helped. They're not at a point in their process where they feel like they can take on services and change their lives. And as a prosecutor that actually has to take their testimony and has to explain to them what goes on to continue a prosecution of an exploitation case, many times I hear the response, I don't want to do that, I don't want to testify, you can't help me, I just want to go back where I came from, leave me alone. So there's a real disconnect between the women themselves identifying themselves as victims. Yeah. And there's a learning curve there. I think we try to work in the 8th Circuit. We try to offer services through our victim advocacy program to educate even that victim to what testifying to a past event may do to help the community and help other women. And it's a sales pitch.
Well, it's very similar. It's the power and control wheel for women. It's very similar to domestic violence. If you were raised in such a high level of dysfunction, every client that we've worked with has been sexually abused as young as 3, 4, 5 years old, abused horrifically for years, run away, and within 48 hours, 80% are taken into some form of the sex trade by that young age, under the belief that, oh, I finally found someone that's going to take care of me. They all say, I thought he was my boyfriend, or I thought they were finally like safe parents.
Or he loved me.
He loved me. And I know there was 8 other girls that I was responsible for, but he loved me the most. And so to help them learn that that's not love is the same as like when a woman comes to a domestic shelter, it's typically 7 to 8 times before a person victimized at that level will finally be ready to receive help. So very often, the police will pick them up and it's time number 3 or it's time number 4 and they're not ready. And the police have gotten so discompassionate because at that point they're like, what are you trying to do? Leave me alone. I want to get back to my boyfriend.
Right.
And they don't know, and it's really just helping them understand that this is not love. This is some crazy abuse cycle. And so helping them afterwards identify what that was and what normal is. Their normal is not our normal.
Yes, and under our system of justice, which we are so thankful that we have because it's the greatest system of justice in the world.
Even with its faults, because we have to be honest with this discussion and say that we do have some faults.
But under our system of justice, it is a very defense-driven system, especially in the state courts, and I know Frank can talk about it from the federal perspective. So the victim in a state prosecution would have to go through a deposition, would first have to go through testimony at the state attorney's office, which is very thorough and detailed to discover whether or not we have a case. Then go through deposition, where defense counsel has the opportunity to examine the victim, and then, of course, appear in front of her, the person she's accusing, and testify before a jury and a judge. And these are women who have a lot of skeletons in their closet, and this process reveals all those skeletons.
Yeah.
And it's
so
emotionally,
re-traumatizing.
yes, it's emotionally very traumatizing. And what we try to do through our victim services component of our office, and I'm sure Marion County has the same thing, what we try to do is we try to prepare the witness, the /witness victim, for what's going to come up next and actually practice and role play so that there is some strengthening, inner core strengthening, that you can bear the deposition and get through it and move on to the next step.
And I think the state is growing there. That's an area where Connie really specializes in, is working with survivors to prepare them for testimonies like that and prepare them for those experiences, because they need to be coached.
Yes.
I think one thing that everyone needs to understand is that investigating and prosecuting cases involving the commercial sexual exploitation of women and children is very resource intensive, and dealing with the victims or the survivors is just one challenge that we have to deal with in these cases. These are really tough cases to prove in the courtroom. But I also want to address another aspect of that, and that is in the earlier series that we watched, we saw what I would term street-level prostitution taking place. And you may look around in our community and say, well, we don't have a problem because I'm not seeing any street-level prostitution take place. But in my experience, the problem has moved off of the streets and onto the net. So today, essentially what you're seeing in prostitution is the people who are prostituting themselves on the street are ones who don't have access to a computer, because that's where the market today is. And the market is taking place, by the way, right here in Gainesville right now. Child sex prostitution and commercial sexual exploitation of women isn't just happening in Sarasota. It's happening right here in this community right now. And that's a reality.
It's Gainesville, it's Ocala, it's Tallahassee. It's not relegated just to the Tampa Bay, just to the Orlando area or anything else, just to piggyback. Because I do a lot of community training, and I run into this issue all the time. And you know, one of the best things about doing the community training is you see a visceral reaction. You see the change in an audience, because you get, as Frank termed it, I think one day, you get a group of people, whether it's 10 or 100, and they look at you with their mouth open and they're hanging on every word because, oh my God, they're being confronted by something absolutely horrible in their community. Because, and it's making them confront the fact that whether you like it or not, it is here. So, and there is some frustrations there. Not to mention, we also have an issue of, and I'm going to kind of back up a little bit. We know from some of the academic studies, when we go to interview these victims, we need anywhere from 3 to 12 interviews before we get usable information for the investigation. Now you add into that, now we're going to have to go at least do, and just like she just narrowed out, another 3 interviews, another 3 statements. So, this victim, that could be 14 years old, is talking about giving their statement 14 or 15 times before there's a resolution to the case. Add into that, we have judges that say that a child that's been a victim of sexual abuse can only be interviewed 3 times, and then it's not usable anymore. So we've got to re-educate our judges. We have to re-educate our prosecutors. We have to do this stuff. While there's an issue with law enforcement understanding this, and my own agency is not immune, there is an issue with the judiciary understanding this as well, just as much. It's one of those things. We have, as a society, we have to finally stand up and bind together and realize that we still have, the social justice movement is not dead in this country. Civil rights movement is not dead. We're still in the thick of it right now, and we have to make a decision to act. We can no longer find this acceptable.
Absolutely.
Commercial sexual exploitation is a challenge that investigation and prosecution alone is not going to really have an impact on. You see, because first off, we don't have the resources to tackle the problem, and the scope and scale of the problem is a lot greater than we know it to be. It's taking place, as I said, right here, right now. I call human trafficking like a multi-headed hydra, which is a dragon from ancient Greek mythology. You can't kill a hydra by chopping off one of the heads. There's the law enforcement prosecution head. Well, we're not going to kill it that way. We're going to have to chop off all of the heads, all of us together, everybody wielding a sword at the same time. Why is there a market for young women, young men? The market is what's driving the crime itself. We're hearing a lot of talk about what are we going to do to help the survivors? How are we going to prosecute the people who are committing these crimes? Well, I'm asking you is what are we going to do to stop this crime from occurring in the first place? What is it? Why is there a marketplace for this commodity? Because if we end the marketplace, we won't have victims. We won't be having to concern ourselves with how are we going to triage these people? How are we going to bring these victims and survivors back to a level of normalcy? That's where I'm suggesting to you our focus needs to be. It needs to be in eliminating the marketplace for women and children and young men. That's where our efforts need to be. So we don't want to fool ourselves into believing we're going to investigate and prosecute this crime away. By the way, how old is this crime? This crime has been occurring since pre-recorded history. Over 10,000 years, people have been sexually exploiting other people. That's reality, folks. And it's awesome to me that right now there seems to be a better awareness. Kind of, it's like almost our country is becoming more self-aware of the nature of this problem. But don't fool yourself. Human trafficking has been around since mankind has been around. And if we're going to be serious about really doing something about this, we need to get the heart of the problem. The heart of the problem is not investigating and prosecuting people, and it's not trying to bring some normalcy to victims and survivors. The heart of the problem is ending the marketplace, and that's where we need to be, folks. And if you don't think there's a marketplace, I invite you, when you go home, to go on the internet and look on the e-commerce websites, and you'll see the marketplace. It's right there, right now, taking place all around us. And there are men and women right now in this neighborhood who are being sexually exploited via the net, and that's reality.
You can go on Backpage right now and plug in your town, and you will have a live feed of what women are for sale and boys in town right now. The most sought after is the 12-year-old boy in the marketplace right now.
And go even further than that. It's not just the where you would see it, expect to see it on Backpage under escorts and body rubs. Go look at the personal sections of Craigslist, and you'll really see the undersided, there's no other way to say it, folks. It's the absolute perversion in our community when you read some of these ads and you look at what people are asking and that kind of thing. And to piggyback on what Frank said real quick, because he brings up a good point, let's end the marketplace, but let's look at what we're going to do for early intervention strategies. We've got money for DARE, we've got money for anti-bullying campaigns, we've got these huge, huge campaigns out there, but where's the anti-human trafficking efforts that are directed at our kids? Because quite frankly, the bad guys are after our kids. They're after our sons and our daughters.
And what you had said about going after the demand side, like what we went after the best practices in the country for our side of it, for working with the survivors. There's programs that are working well in San Francisco, the SAGE project, the Jeanne program. That's just a matter of bringing in some new statutes to the state. So getting everybody on board to do what's working well around the country is.
And we will talk more about that in our next segment. We've almost solved the problem right now, but we do have more solutions to bring to the table when we come right back. We'll be back in just a minute.